It's nice to see everybody here. This looks like an annual meeting of the Witness Protection Club, you know. We're really glad to have everybody here. Thank you. And it's a real privilege for us to host this event. This is, I look across the room and, I think 90% of the people here in some way have either managed a confirmation or been confirmed or have tried to help somebody get confirmed. I mean, that's one thing. But nobody knows more about this interesting problem in Washington than Arnold Punaro. And he's written this fascinating book. It's probably not going to be on the New York Times bestseller list, but for anybody who's appointed, they're going to be reading it because it's a tour to help you figure out how to survive what has become a torturous process, sadly. And I think we just have to step back. One thing you're probably going to hear frequently today is the word broken. We got a broken system, and we need to do something about it. You know, you hold the president accountable, through the electoral process. You don't throw hotspurs on the road to try to cripple his horses. That's what we're doing now, and it just doesn't make sense. We need to restore the integrity of a system where the officers of the government are held accountable through the president, but we need to have them in office, and this is becoming a challenge. And so we're going to explore all of that today. I want to say thank you very much to Jennifer Griffin. Thank you for moderating the session today, but we're going to first start with the author of this book, If Confirmed. Would you please welcome to the stage Arnold Punaro, General Arnold Punaro.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hamry, for that great introduction, and also for CSIS to generously hosting this event. I'm really privileged to be part of the extended CSIS community. For me, it started in 1974 when my immediate boss in Senator Nunn's office, Roland McElroy, told me to do some research for a panel Senator Nunn had agreed to do for Dr. David Abshire in CSIS. I'm glad what we thought at the time was a one-time effort became a 50-year relationship for Senator Nunn and myself. I'd also like to extend my heartfelt welcome and thanks to my most distinguished fellow panelists, Senator Nunn, Senator Chambliss, General Jones, and to Jennifer Griffin for moderating our discussion, and to everyone here today in person and those via live stream. And I want to give a big thanks to my book team, especially Julie Robertson, Stephanie Barna, Arena Plax, and Anita Kaiser, and thanks to the teams at our publisher Fortis, VSSL, that did our cover for the third time, and Steer Public Relations for their support. Finally, to my family, most especially my wife Jan, for their love and support through this process. My third book, If Confirmed, has its roots in the 50 years I've been involved in the Senate confirmation process for national security nominations, from my early days on Senator Nunn's personal staff, then as the Armed Services Committee staff director for 14 years, and since 1997, working with and on nominations with both the executive branch and the Senate, especially the Senate Armed Services Committee. My motivation to write If Confirmed comes from concern over our nation's preparedness to take on the most dangerous and unpredictable world I've seen in my lifetime, and the incredible importance to our national security of the Department of Defense, the Department of Energy Nuclear Weapons Complex, and the intelligence organizations. These are the world's largest, most complex organizations, and they demand leaders in place to ensure that they are ready to deter, and if deterrence fail, to fight and win against very determined adversaries. The jobs leading these organizations are not for the faint of heart. The civilian leaders who are confirmed will be charged with organizing, training, and equipping our military forces, ensuring our nuclear deterrence, and gathering intelligence against our adversaries. The warfighting commanders, like General Jim Jones, requiring Senate confirmation, have the solemn responsibility to lead the men and women in combat. And those warfighters deserve the Senate's very best efforts to get those individuals confirmed in a timely manner and to ensure they have experience and skilled leadership, sound judgment, and a deep understanding of today's complex threats. Further, our national security leaders must possess a background and a spirit of nonpartisanship and a commitment to working across party lines. Regrettably, what was once a well-run and effective process has deteriorated over the years, becoming badly bent, and now, as Dr. Hamry said, it's broken. One of the reasons for this is the increase in the number of civilian positions requiring Senate confirmation, from 200 in the 1960s to 1,200 today. Another reason is the time it takes for the Senate to approve nominees. In the Kennedy administration, for the top officials, it was about 3 months. Now it's over a year. You know, for the most recent Obama, Trump, Biden administrations, over a year. A really stark example was the fact that the recent Assistant Secretary of Defense for Manpower and Reserve Affairs took 18 months to get confirmed in the U.S. Senate, even though there was absolutely no concern over the nominee's qualifications. Right now, Melissa Dalton, the nominee to be the Undersecretary of the Air Force, has been pending in the Senate 8 months. The leader has filed cloture, so she'll probably get a vote here before the Memorial Day recess. But she's been waiting 8 months in the Senate. And then guess what? The executive branch took 8 months from the time her predecessor left to actually nominate her. So 16 months, one of the largest organizations in our government has been without the second most important person, you know, confirmed person in that job. So my hope is that, if confirmed, will inspire the executive branch and the Senate to embark on tackling real reform. Those reforms need to include significantly reducing the number of positions requiring confirmation, streamlining and standardizing the paperwork, and then having a time certain for consideration after reasonable consideration. So I hope you'll walk away from the panel discussion filled with a sense of urgency to get this process modernized so we can get the best people serving in national security key positions. And also, if this book can help someone who may be considering going into government but is feeling uneasy about what can be a frustrating and often highly contentious confirmation process, then I will consider it a success. Our key leaders will always be our greatest weapon in any conflict, and we can't afford to lose the best of those due to a broken process. With that, I'm going to turn it over to award-winning national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin of Fox News to get us started. Jennifer.
Thank you, Arnold. And I can't think of a more important book right now, and it's just been released today, if confirmed. Arnold, as many of you know, served as staff director of the Senate Armed Services Committee for 24 years. So he saw it from one side and then went over to the Pentagon and has advised 12 defense secretaries who were nominated, 12 chairmen of the Joint Chiefs, 40 service chiefs, and 2,000 civilians through these complicated nomination processes. So the book, and it's entitled, If Confirmed. I want to ask you, Arnold, first of all, why If Confirmed? There's a story behind that goes back to Graham Allison. Tell me about why you chose that.
So Jennifer and Senator Nunn will remember this well because he was the chairman of the committee. The Senate Armed Services Committee is very focused on nominees not taking any actions before they're actually approved by the United States Senate. So we call that the presumption of confirmation. During the hearings for civilians and for the military, the chairman of the committee always asks this question on the record: have you done anything to presume the outcome of the confirmation process? So in the Clinton administration, Graham Allison, wonderful person that was highly qualified for a job to be an assistant secretary, got over in the Pentagon and was already kind of making recommendations, making personnel decisions, and he got ratted out to the committee. John Warner was the ranking member. He was very upset about it. Dirk Kempthorne, Senator Nunn, Robert Byrd, and so basically he was presuming the outcome. So we put him in the penalty box for a good long period of time, and also made him come over and genuflect and kiss the ring. But the point was, nominees and my colleagues would say, if the Senate will ask you, well, what are you going to do when you become the Undersecretary for Intelligence? The answer first is, well, if confirmed, if you approve me, this is what I'm going to do. So that's every nominee, you'll see that in any hearing, they always say, if confirmed. So that's why I titled the book, you know, it's up to the United States Senate. Believe it or not, the Congress has the last word on personnel and budgets under the Constitution. So it comes from that presumption. And there have been a few over the years that have been caught, and they pay a big penalty for that.
Incredible. So it goes back to Graham Allison's confirmation hearing. I want to welcome the rest of our panel. Obviously, Senator Sam Nunn, everyone knows, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee for so many years. Senator Saxby Chambliss, also from the great state of Georgia, led the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence for years, served on the SASC for years. and General Jim Jones, who served as the Marine Commandant, as well as SACEUR, Supreme Allied Commander Europe, went through his own confirmation hearings, and then served as National Security Advisor under President Obama. You may notice a little bit of a bias in the Georgia delegation, and I have 2 Marines and 2 senators, and I'm not going to get into who's seen more combat, but here we are. Senator Nunn, tell me about sitting on the other side and preparing, and why you felt, why your role under Article 1 of the Constitution, advice and consent, why it's so important that senators have that role.
Well, just let me summarize my view on Arnold by saying that he's the very best. He was a terrific Marine. He was wounded in combat. He was a terrific assistant press secretary, started off taking pictures in my office. He was a terrific military assistant before I became chairman of the Armed Services Committee, and then he was the staff director, both when Democrats were in the minority and when we were in the majority and I was chairman. So Arnold has written, this is his 3rd book, and all of them are very valuable. And given the timing of this book, it may be the most valuable of it all. I view advice and consent through the old book, Advice and Consent by Alan Drury. That really inspired. It had a lot to do with me wanting to be in the Congress of the United States, whether the Senate or the House. That book showed the good, bad, and ugly of the Senate. He wrote several other books, Preserve and Protect and others, but I fell in love with the Senate as an institution because that book showed the flaws, the human characteristics, the selfish motives, but it also showed the honor and integrity that senators are capable of. And it showed what the Senate as an institution, the role it plays at its very best. The words advice and consent are pretty powerful. People tend to think of it as consent, but it is advice and consent. It applies to treaties as well as to the officials that Congress deems to be the highest officials that deserve qualification. And of course, the Constitution spells out a number of those. And I think that viewed at its best, and we have seen it in the last year or so at its worst, but viewed as its best, it basically gives senators a chance to ask questions to the brightest, hopefully the best and brightest people our country has to offer, and to really be informed by listening to the answers. So smart senators listen to what the people that are testifying tell them about what they think about the problems facing our country. And as Arnold would agree, smart nominees listen to the questions because the questions indicate the priorities of the senators. And the senators are part of the U.S. government and the Constitution, a very important part. And so smart senators and smart nominees benefit from the process if the process is working correctly. And I would add one other feature. Smart presidents use the fact that they have to get confirmation of top officials to tell good friends, I'd love to have you in that position, but right now I don't think you would be confirmed. The Senate is looking for this, this, and this. It can be done in somewhat a gentle way. So that's at its best. And I think we ought to view it, at least to begin with, and how it really works. It's designed to get the very best people we can to serve our country and to give them some general sense of what the legislative branch of government is thinking about the priorities.
Senator Chambliss, you had some contentious moments with Secretary Rumsfeld. You sat on the other side. Tell us about that, first of all, and also how, from your point of view, is the system broken right now?
Well, let me start off by saying that Arnold and I are both bulldogs. Go dogs! Go dogs. And Arnold reminded Sam back in the green room that if he had wanted to go to Georgia, he was, but he couldn't get in, so he had to go to Georgia Tech. I think we could get him in now.
My problem is I couldn't get out of Tech.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jennifer. I did. Number one, I had a great relationship with Don Rumsfeld. He was a spectacular man, spectacular SecDef, and a great public servant. But during my my early years in the Senate, everybody in this room knows about C-130s. They are the bulwark of the heavy lift in every branch of the military. C-130s have been around for, gosh, 40 years, General, I'm guessing. But they're all made in Marietta, Georgia. So I am very parochial when it comes to the C-130s. So Lockheed manufactures the C-130s, and they came up with an idea about the fact that, look, we make all these C-130s. It's a fight every year going through Congress to add airplanes and whatnot, but they always add airplanes. So we're going to build 20 or 30 a year, whatever. And if we knew that they were going to be able to do that, we can save the Department of Defense a lot of money by doing what we call a multi-year program. You just commit that they're going to buy X number of C-130s. So I worked on that issue for about a year. It was tough and it was complex because you had to go through every branch of the military and go through each chief, sign off and whatever. But at the end of the day, we got it done. And the only thing we needed was Don Rumsfeld to sign off on it. And I would talk to him regularly about whatever going on between the intel world and on the SAS side. And I mentioned to him a couple of times, I said, Mr. Secretary, you've got this multi-year document sitting on your desk, and all you have to do is sign it, and we'll be okay, we'll be done, and we're going to save you a lot of money. And he'd always say, yeah, we'll get it done, we'll get it done. Well, that went on for about a month. And he called me up one day about something, and we talked about it, and I said, by the way, Mr. Secretary, have you signed that multi-year form that's on your desk? He said, no, but I'll get around to it. Well, about 2 days later, one of his undersecretaries resigned, and he named somebody else to replace him, and it was a nomination that had to be confirmed by the Senate. So I immediately put a hold on it. And I knew what was going to happen. And about 2 days later, my assistant came in and she said, the Office of the Secretary of Defense wants to talk to you. I said, so the office does? She said, no, it's the Secretary. So I got on the phone with Rumsfeld, and he lit me up, as Don could do. And I can't repeat the expletives that he used, but at the end of his conversation with me, I said, well, Mr. Secretary, let me tell you, you remember that piece of paper that I keep talking to you about is sitting on your desk, and all you have to do is sign it, and we'll have the multi-year, save you a lot of money, and you'll have your undersecretary. He said, well, okay. So 2 days later, they called back and said, it's done. So I lifted my hold. That's the only time I put a hold on a nominee for something other than was a really major issue. But,
Incredible.
you know, it's unfortunate, the process, the nomination process, whether it's ambassadorships or civilians or militaries, has gotten sideways. And we're going to talk a lot about that today, about what happened and hopefully some solutions.
General Jones, tell me about your confirmation hearings. You had 2 of them. And what mistakes did you make? What was it like sitting there? What were you not prepared for? What did you learn during that process?
Well, thank you, Jennifer. My background with these distinguished gentlemen to my right goes back to 1979 when I was a major, and I was selected to go to the Marine Corps Command and Staff College at Quantico, which I very much wanted to do, which was a necessary stop along the way in your career. And I was called into General Habel's office, who was the head of manpower management in the Marine Corps headquarters, and he said, how would you like to go over to and be the Senate liaison? And I said, frankly, sir, not at all. I said, I'm selected to go to Command and Staff College. I'm very happy with that, and I'm getting to be a relatively senior major, and if I don't get to Command and Staff, I'll probably miss it. And he said, well, why don't you go down and talk to General Brewster, who was the Marine Corps legislative assistant at the time, and see what he says. So I went down and talked to General Brewster, and he said, you know, we'd really like to have you, but if you come over to the Senate, you got to be there for 3 years. And I said, yes. I can't do that because I'll be hopefully promoted to lieutenant colonel. And so I thought I'd won that fight. And so I went back up to General Habel and I said, well, we had a good conversation. But he said he needs somebody for 3 years. Obviously, I can't do that. He says, no, he said, obviously you can. The Commandant of the Marine Corps wants you to go over and be the Senate liaison. And that was General Barrow at the time. And so that's how...
That was advice and no consent.
Pardon me?
That was the Marine Corps' advice and no consent.
Exactly. So in August of '79, I went over to the Russell building and discovered that my new boss is a Navy captain named John McCain, who was in a trip to China, I think, with Senator Nunn and a whole distinguished group of senators. And so I sat there for about 10 days until Captain McCain came back, and we had some interesting times together for his last year on active duty in the Navy. So this was 1979, and I wound up not going to Command and Staff College because General Barrow decided to keep the legislative team in office for all 4 years. And then General Kelly, PX Kelly, succeeded him, and the first thing he did was said, nobody in legislative affairs is leaving for the first year. So that's how I wound up spending 5 years in the Russell building. Years later, when I was fortunate enough to be nominated to be the Commandant of the Marine Corps, I realized that all of that experience over 5 years, going to endless hearings and confirmations and all of that, really served me in good stead because I'd seen it all. And but I still took it very, very seriously. I studied as much as I could on what the questions might be asked, what the vision was for the Marine Corps. Arnold was obviously very, very helpful in going about how you prepare for these hearings. So, but I think compared to others who come out of the blue to a confirmation process, I was fortunate enough to have a relatively benign time in the confirmation process. But again, I had traveled with many of the senators. They knew me, I knew them, and they still didn't hold all of my mistakes against me.
We always thought you were enjoying being with us, Jim.
Tried to prepare over the years made. Tell us a little bit about Dean Winslow and his confirmation hearing, which you write about in the book.
Certainly, and before I want to pick up on Saxby's or Senator Chambliss's comment, when Richard Russell from Georgia chaired the Senate Armed Services Committee and Carl Vinson chaired the House Armed Services Committee, Senator Dunn's great uncle, there was a story that the two of them, of course, both from Georgia, they would say, look, everybody, don't worry, even though the two Georgia chairmen, we're going to treat everybody even Steven. 50% for Georgia and 50% for the rest of the nation. And the none in Chambliss operation, as Charlie Harmon and others know, you can never have enough C-130s. So let me answer your question by saying that I want to talk about the mistakes for people that say something they shouldn't, and then a mistake from people that don't say something they should. So Dean Winslow was nominated in the Trump administration to be the Assistant Secretary for Health Affairs. And he had been a military doctor. He'd had a great record. He was pretty impressed with himself, and so he told the ASD legislative team, hey, I don't really need to prepare, and I'm too busy. I can only come in, a couple hours before the hearing. They tried to get him to kind of do the normal prep that most nominees are willing to do. Didn't work, so they said, hey, Arnold, could you at least spend 15 minutes with him and kind of go through the do's and the don'ts? So I got to sit down with him, and he wasn't really interested in my advice, but I went through the do's and don'ts. And one of the key don'ts, and my colleague, Rhett Dawson, that was on the prep team with me for years, was always the best at this. Don't answer any questions that are not asked, and don't offer any information beyond, what you need to. So Dean gets up there at a hearing with couple other nominees, and there's a question about domestic violence and uses of guns. And he gave a really good answer on that. And then he said, I probably shouldn't say this.
A dead giveaway.
And then he said, I don't think anyone ought to be able to buy an AR-15 rifle. And of course, that was the end of his nomination, because obviously the committee, and certainly the Republicans on the committee and in the Senate, that was it. And so, his name was withdrawn by the next morning. The example on the other side of saying something you should, in the Obama administration, Don Remy was nominated to be the Army General Counsel, highly qualified, but he had worked at Fannie Mae during the time of the scandal, even though he had nothing to do with it. There was never implication. He was a general counsel. So we're prepping him, and my other colleague, Kim Wincup, spotted and said, hey, Don, you don't list on your resume that you were the general counsel at Fannie Mae. You really ought to put it on there, because if you don't, that's going to kind of be a red flag for the Armed Services Committee. And he said, you're right. I absolutely agree. I'm going to do that. Well, it went to the White House counsel's office, and they basically said, oh, no, we don't want you to put on there that you were the general counsel. Steffi, you might have been the general counsel on the committee at that time. I don't remember. But in any event, he didn't do it. So Senator Menendez, this one from Florida, Republican from Florida, caught him and said, well, weren't you the general, oh, yes, I was. Well, why don't you have it on your resume? It went downhill from there. They basically had to withdraw his nomination because, he didn't disclose that. And he couldn't say in his answer to the senator, well, the White House wouldn't let me do it. But then, of course, in the current administration, Biden administration, he was nominated to be the deputy at VA, and had it on his resume and got through with flying colors and had a big vote in the Senate. So those are the two examples of people saying something they shouldn't and then not saying something they should.
Senator Nunn, you've talked about how the FBI background check maybe needs to be addressed because it's going back so far, bogging the FBI down in some ways, and not really finding what is needed to see whether a candidate is qualified. What would you change, if you could, about that process, and what is the problem with it now?
Well, I think it needs a lot of study. Arnold makes some suggestions in his book. I think all of them should be considered. Everything he says to make the process more efficient, including that, in my view, should be taken very seriously by the House and Senate Armed Services Committee, but also by the other committees, because many of the principles that he addresses apply to other committees that confirm too, although he's focused an awful lot on the military nominations, as well he should in that book. But I would not go back so far. I mean, I don't, who wants to ever, who believes that we ought to look at high school records? I think if something comes up about a high school record and it basically is a glaring problem, then they'd perhaps look into it. But I would use basically the FBI to look at the last 10, 15 years of an adult service and not go all the way back. FBI gets too many requests, too bogged down. When a president comes in, he's got a dilemma. Maybe he has 4 candidates to be Secretary of Defense or Secretary of State or National Security Advisor, and he really can't send the FBI out to look at all of them in any in-depth. but maybe we need some preliminary look, just a glance, and then let the president make his decision. But the problem comes if a president has already publicly nominated someone, and then the FBI sets in motion a check, and they run into a problem. And we've had that happen over and over. There's no great answer, except that I think the process needs to be as short as it needs to be from a public record search. Give the president some idea before he makes an announcement. The White House counsel is the first place to intercept it, because there's basically a nominee should not be sent to the Senate if they've got a glaring known problem. I mean, the president ought to call the chairman of the committee if he really wants to appoint him, and sit down with the chairman and the ranking member and say, hey, we've got this, this, and this. Is this a crippling problem? Give me your best advice. That's what advice means. It could be a lot smoother if there was more coordination between the White House counsel's office and the committees before a nominee is sent up.
But that long FBI investigation that goes into every person you've known, every foreign national that you've ever met, every country you've ever been to, is really bogging down this process.
It's bogging down the process. I not on the confirmation, but on just a clearance. After I got out of the Senate, I had an FBI clearance check. First question was asked to me, have you ever been to a foreign country? and I said, yeah, I've also met some foreigners. But I mean, they really need better guidelines. They need tighter guidelines about what the inquiries are. And then if they run into a problem, take a deep dive.
Yeah. Senator Chambliss, what impact you described how you had placed a hold on a nominee, a brief hold, in order to make a point to DOD, to the Pentagon. What impact did Senator Tuberville's hold have on this process? And is it so extreme now that, has that woken people up to just how broken this is?
Well, people need to understand that all 100 members of the Senate take seriously the constitutional requirement on advice and consent. And particularly those of us who went from the House, and the jurisdictional issues that the House had were minimal compared to the jurisdictional issues on the Senate side. And advice and consent was one of the primary ones. So everybody is very diligent on the committees that they work on when it comes to the confirming of any nomination. The issue that obviously came up with the Tuberville hold had nothing to do with the committee that he sits on. And it was okay for, a couple of weeks maybe. And then everybody knows, and just from the press, what happened. It was spiraled. And Tommy is my good friend. He's very stubborn. Of course, he went to Auburn, so that's part of the problem. I was coaching at Auburn, but in any event, it got to a point to where he was in a box, and some of his colleagues, thank goodness, stood up and finally had a sit down and said, here's going to be the impact on the Senate, not the impact on the issue that you're concerned with. Here's the impact it's going to be on the Senate. And thank goodness it got worked out. While I was there, and I don't know about you, I don't think so with you, because I don't remember any other issue like this coming up, Sam, in the Senate before. The hold it's sacred, because if there's a real reason to make a hold on somebody because they're not really qualified to be confirmed for whatever position they've been nominated for, that's okay. And you can make your case. In the case with Tommy, he really couldn't make a case that this person was not qualified, and obviously it was 50,000 folks, as it turned out to be, or whatever the number was, with all the trickle down. What I'm hopeful is that that's the outlier. That's never happened before, and it was not a positive process going on in the Senate. And I'm hopeful that a good lesson was learned by that there's a way to utilize holes, there's a way not to use holes.
General Jones, a lot of young officers ended up getting out because of the Tuberville holds, because they weren't moving, they didn't see the ability to move up because that backlog really slowed things down. What impact did you see it have on the military? And then you've also expressed concerns about the way ambassadors are being held up, not being confirmed, and how we have all these empty ambassador positions.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about confirmation here, but to Senator Nunn's point about his clearance, the first question, have you ever traveled? My recent clearance upgrade was the young man came in, put out all of his papers in front of me and said, my first question, well, his first question to me was, have you ever served in the military? And, I just looked at him and I said, really? Is that? Anyway, but I do think there are some reforms in the way we handle our clearances that would really speed up the process. That's maybe for another time, but to your question, one of the things that I think resonates in our public, especially with people who would be thinking about a career in the military or a career in public service, that these kinds of spectacles that are televised, especially if the hearing is acrimonious, usually, if you're going up for confirmation, you bring your spouse, you bring your children, you bring your relatives, and you get front row seating and everything. But if it turns into a really harsh interrogation, that sends a message out to the public that says, I'm thinking of doing this, but I'm not so sure that I want to put myself through this. And I think that's a big problem out there, because everything is televised. And I think there's ways that you can avoid that. When I was coming up for confirmation, national security was a bipartisan issue. Republicans and Democrats who were pretty much united on the big issues as to what they were going to ask and everything. People had preferences, totally understand that. But when it's now moved over to more of a partisan issue, where if the Democrats have one line of questioning, the Republicans will have another line of questioning, the person that gets batted around is the person at the witness table. So I think we need to go back to the way, a more dignified way in which you can achieve your goals, but without trashing somebody publicly who may not even deserve it, for openers. On the question of ambassadors, one of the things that I've discovered in my professional life that involved a lot of travel was the fact that at the end of an administration, typically all political appointee ambassadors leave, and the professional ambassadors generally stay. But the effect of that is really has global consequences, I think, because most of our friends and allies who have embassies and embassy staffs and ambassadors do not understand our process when it takes a year and a half to confirm an ambassador. Say, in the present case, go back to Saudi Arabia, a pretty important country. A year and a half to confirm an ambassador. Saudis don't understand that. I mean, they take it as a sign of disrespect, that we're not seen as a valuable ally. If you're not even willing to send an ambassador over here and you leave the DCM as the chargé for a year and a half, that doesn't go well. So in the Obama administration, I raised that issue as National Security Advisor, and Secretary Clinton actually agreed with it. And we actually, for a brief period of time after President Obama took over, we actually had some of the ambassadors stay until properly relieved by another ambassador, which I think is the optimum solution for our reputation globally. But unfortunately, we're back to the old system where when President Trump came in, all of the Democratic political appointed ambassadors left, and we waited forever for the new round of ambassadors to be appointed. That is not good for the United States.
And right now, there are still, at the end of the Biden administration, dozens of ambassadors that are open at this point. Arnold, I want to go back to, first of all, there's a QR code if you want to submit any questions. We'll go to questions in a couple minutes. But there's a QR code at the back, and you can submit your questions, and we'll read them up here. Arnold, go back to some of the other pitfalls for nominees and what you have advised people over the years when you talk about giving personal views versus administration's views, if you're asked that, or giving or not giving personal views. There are a couple of examples that you write about.
That's a great, thank you. That's a great issue to deal with, and picks up really on General Jones's comments, particularly for the military, and identify with Senator Chambliss's comments on Senator Tuberville, because we expect our military, when asked, to give their personal views, even if they differ from the administration in power. So when you go from 2-star to 3 or 3 to 4, General Jones had to sign a piece of paper, and he also got this question in his 2 confirmations. You sign it and you say, if asked, will you give your personal views, even if they differ from the administration in power? The only answer is yes, because if you answer no, the Senate's not going to approve you. And you get the live question. So Admiral Kelso, nominated to be Chief of Naval Operations, Senator Nunn's the chairman, I'm sitting behind him, he's asking the standard question. Admiral Kelso, if asked, will you give your personal views, even if they differ from the administration in power? And Admiral Kelso said, well, Mr. Chairman, I want to check first with the Secretary of Defense. And Senator Nunn said, well, Admiral, there's only a yes or no answer to that question, my question, and you can give either. But if you say no, you won't be confirmed. Kelso, snap back, Mr. Chairman, yes. So the point is, we don't want to politicize military nominations like federal judges. All federal judges now have to get cloture. So the worry about, we don't want, the military should be apolitical, and we expect them to give their personal views when asked. They, not offer them if they're not asked, but in any event, so that's it. Now, on the personal views for civilians, the rule of the road is, as a civilian nominee, you only represent the views of the administration. You're not entitled to personal views. And that's schooled by every administration I've ever dealt with. Some heads of the Assistant Secretary of Defense or Legislative Affairs are here in the audience. They know that. So Trump administration comes in, or first in the Obama administration, Alyssa Slotkin, who's now a congresswoman from Michigan, who'd been in the CIA, been in Iraq, served, and she was nominated to be an Assistant Secretary of Defense. And John McCain was the chairman, colleague for many years, and he had particular views on Syria that were at odds with the administration's view on Syria. Well, we're prepping Slotkin, and it was very clear to us that her views on Syria were pretty close to McCain's. We thought that was a good thing. We said, look, he's going to ask, and we ought to see if we can get you some running room to give your personal views, because if you don't, you're going to probably run into a buzzsaw. The Pentagon actually was kind of leaning in the right direction on that, but the White House, oh no, we can't have that. She gets up there for the hearing, and McCain asked her, and he asked her personal views. She gave the administration party line. That was the end of her nomination. It just went down the till from there. So, because he expected, and as chairman, he really required the civilians. He wanted people to be a straight shooter. In the Trump administration, Dave Trachtenberg was nominated to be the deputy under for policy. Syria was still a hot topic. McCain was still the chairman. He goes by to McCain's office for his office calls, and of course, we'd prep him for the office calls too. He's going to give the party line on Syria, which we knew McCain was going to hate. Sure enough, he hated it. He said, that's it. You're not even going to have a hearing. Go home. Don't ever come back. So we said, okay, let's see if we can, revive his nomination. So we actually got and worked with a couple of people here in the room were with me on this, worked with the White House, and to their great credit, they said, okay, if that's what it's going to take with Senator McCain, we'll cut you a little slack on personal views. So we had to do a lot of genuflecting to get him back on Senator McCain's schedule, which we did. And he went, met with him, gave his personal views. He liked it. Okay, we're going to have a hearing. And he got confirmed. And we had that with 3 or 4 other Trump nominees when McCain was chairman, because he wasn't going to budge if you didn't give your personal views. I think it's the right thing is that the military is allowed to give their personal views if asked, because we want their best military judgment. I do think civilians, they represent the position of the administration. So as a general rule, they ought to represent the administration's position, because that's going to be the position after they get confirmed. But in few cases, to get good people in, you have to cut them a little slack. So, that's the personal view issue.
One of the interesting things is the Senate rules depend on common sense, good judgment, and civility and respect. And if you have senators that don't have any of those characteristics, or at least 2 or 3 of them,
Yeah.
you got a real problem. Because the rules that make individual senators powerful and make the Senate such a special institution and different from the House and different from any other parliamentary body, those rules also, when abused, will make us miserable and make the country perceive the Senate as being less than effective. And as General Punaro would say, dysfunctional at times. And so I think it's a burden on the Senate. The question of personal views, I think senators should be able to get the personal views, but it ought to be very rare when they ask it. It should be on matters of great importance. That's what's wrong with the filibuster now. Basically it has always been reserved on matters where you really need a long debate to let the country absorb, to let there be a boiling pot, to let steam go out. But when you start threatening to filibuster everything, it's an abuse of the rules. And so I think senators have to realize if the Senate of the United States is going to remain the most unique and I think the most brilliant concept of a constitutional system, the Senate and the House together, both, the senators have to cherish it as an institution. And to do that, they have to use restraint in not abusing the rules. And if they continue to abuse the rules, the Senate of the United States will either be in great disrespect of the American people, I think it's respected now, but, or it will have to change the rules radically. And I think some of the Senate rules that can easily be abused are safeguards and guardrails in our democracy. That really is what makes us unique. We're not a majority rule on every question country. I mean, we never would have had a country if that was the case. Every state gets 2 senators. New York and Rhode Island both have 2 senators. That is not a pure democracy. Our country was designed to be representative democracy or a republic. And I think we really need to understand that. And also I think that it's very, very important that we understand that we have somewhat an illusion about the power of the presidency. The executive branch is a team. The president has to, whatever the president, whether male, female, whatever the age, they have to have good people around them. And the Senate, as an institution and confirmation, need to make sure that they play the role of helping the president get good people. And the president needs to occasionally ask for advice before they make an appointment. And the more that is done, not on everyone, it's the president's choice, but the more the system will work. Our constitutional system has a lot of safeguards. It is not designed to be the most efficient system in the world. Efficiency is not the same thing as what our founding fathers had in mind. Monarchies can be efficient, but they're not really republics or democracies. So civility, respect, good judgment, common sense. If you don't have those dimensions, no set of rules is going to save you.
And you know, Jennifer, the questions that occasionally we see on from the Senate side is about the political position of nominees, which, I mean, most nominees may have the same political views as the administration, but not necessarily. And we can all think of any number of members who were Republican cabinet members in Democrat administrations and vice versa. But now it seems to be that in a lot of confirmations, somebody wants to make a statement, a political statement. And there again, that's not good in the best interest of the Senate and the process.
I'd like to spend the rest of our time, the next 10 minutes, talking about how to fix this broken process. Arnold, why don't you summarize what you have in the book in terms of what your recommendations are?
Well, thank you, and I would encourage everybody, because it's you can't do a bumper sticker on the reforms. Yeah. Chapter 16 is very carefully, it's a lengthy chapter, but it's got a lot of detail. I would say the first thing is significantly reduce the number of people requiring Senate confirmation. In the Department of Defense, we've gone from having 10 people requiring confirmation to 65. And it's just too much of a workload. And one of my recommendations is that we significantly reduce the number. In the old days, we had Assistant Secretaries of Defense, and they didn't have anybody above them. Now we have Undersecretaries of Defense. We've gone from 1 to 6, although right now, 3 of the top Undersecretaries in Defense don't have confirmed people in those positions. The ASDs all work for them. So you could reduce the number of Assistant Secretaries of Defense, you could reduce the number of Service Assistant Secretaries, and then focus on the really high priority nominations. But you would allow those people to still have the title of honorable. They would have to commit to testify, but it would significantly reduce the workload on the numbers. The same thing, when you look at the total numbers, for all the other parts of government. The second thing, and this would be something that should be a little bit easier to do, and that is both the executive branch and the legislative branch still do all the paperwork for confirmation with stubby pencils, when the whole rest of the world has gone electronic. And they use different forms, different requirements, and it's, as Senator Nunn said, it's quite exhaustive. You could go to one electronic form, get agreement that they're both going to use the same electronic thing. By the way, the Congress has allowed in the legal that you can have electronic signatures for just about anything you do now. That doesn't happen in the executive branch or the legislative branch for Senate confirmations. And you could have a dashboard, electronic dashboard, so a nominee could figure out where the heck their nomination is. I have nodding heads in the audience because I'll be honest with you, as sophisticated as that we think the system is, nominees don't have a clue as to what the status of their nomination is because it's so, close hold. So you go to electronic forms. And then the final thing, and this gets to the point that Senator Nunn and Chambliss were talking about in Jim, is the hold. And so I would say right off the bat, Senator Chambliss is absolutely correct. If there's a nominee that has a concern about qualifications, credibility, things like that, I don't have a problem, and nobody should have a problem with a hold on something like that. But when you have a hold, as Senator Tuberville did, on over 450 flag and jail officers that had nothing to do with their qualifications, and it lasted for almost 9 months. It was, I think that when you have holds that were related to that, the Senate ought to have a process where the parliamentarian could rule, is that hold germane to the individual's nomination? And if not, then there would be a process, for basically a time certain for that person to get to a vote. And I would also have a thing where you have a certain amount of time in the committee of jurisdiction, the Senate Armed Services Committee, and then you'd have a certain time on the floor before you could come up for that germaneness question. And that would that would make a huge difference. As Senator Nunn said, you don't want to get rid of the guardrails, so that's why I would want to use the parliamentary process, Senator Nunn and Senator Chambliss, of germaneness and whether or not, and by the way, you also could have a requirement that if somebody has a hole, they got to go public with it and give a rationale for why it was. Now, there was no secret about Senator Tuberville's hole. The problem was it had nothing to do, it had a very adverse impact.
The rationale wasn't rational.
Yeah, and right now there are 129 names on the Senate executive calendar, of which like 21 are judges. The Senate, and the oldest one has been waiting a year for a vote in the Senate. I don't think they're going to do anything more than judges, and everybody has to have cloture now, and you can only get 1 or 2 cloture nominations done a week, and so, you know, we're just totally stymied. So if we don't make some of these fundamental changes, reduce the number, streamline the paperwork, have a process by which somebody knows that they're going to get a vote at a certain point, if the hold is not germane, those would be the major 3 things that I would do.
We have a good question from David Buckley, who says, who can repair the broken process in the Senate? Leadership, committee chairpersons? Who makes the rules and tracks the performance of the Senate?
Saxby, my view is that majority and minority leaders have accumulated more and more power at the expense of the committee chairs and ranking members. I think too much is being kicked upstairs, not enough at the committee process. Committees have a way of having testimony. You hear witnesses that have different views. I love to have them on the same panel where you can compare them and get them to talk to each other in a civil, respectful way. That's how you learn. That's how you educate. That's how the media learns. If it's a good committee hearing, it's how the American people learn. We need the Senate and the House they're educational institutions, educating the members, but educating the public. And the news media, of course, Jennifer plays an enormous role in that. So I think the committee process needs to be re-strengthened. There always can be abuses, but when you put everything in the majority leader, like a health care bill, everything has to be negotiated in the majority leader's office. That's happened. I think basically the majority leader, minority leaders, they have to solve a lot of these problems. They're enormously important positions. They deserve respect, but when an institution like the Senate begins to break down, it does not inure to the benefit of the 2 leaders. And I think they would do well to share out the burdens with committee chairs and the ranking members. There's a much greater chance that the chairman and ranking member can work out a legislative deal than calling senators in the majority leader's office. That ought to be a last resort. And it's now too much of a first resort.
But in order to make a change, you have to change the rules, or you may have to have a legislative fix. In either case, the majority leader is going to dictate what comes to the floor, and the majority leader is going to dictate whether or not any vote on a change in rule is going to take place. And if you take all of the recommendations that Arnold has in his book, they're all great common sense recommendations, but all of them take a little bit of power away from the majority leader and the minority leader, and that's difficult. They like power, and that's why they are where they are. But we've had so many extreme situations, and Tupperville is one of them, that really has started to make some conversations take place between senators. And we haven't seen that in a long time, Sam. Republicans and Democrats are talking together about maybe there's some changes that we ought to think about. And hopefully that carries the day.
General Jones, we have a question from Christine Simmons, Partnership for Public Service. She says, in the absence of confirmed appointees, presidents of both parties rely on temporary officials serving in acting capacities. How does the growing prevalence of acting officials affect governance and decision-making? Is that a reason for senators to implement the reforms recommended in Arnold's exceptional book?
Well, I think that that is a reason for reform, and we need to really address it seriously, because I think the current direction that we're going in is not healthy for the country, and we all ought to just agree on that, whether you're Republican or Democrat, and get to the business at hand and fix it.
Arnold, we have a few minutes. I'll give you the last word. And everybody, please, this is released today. If confirmed, make sure you go. Is it on Amazon, or what's the best place to order?
I think it's on all the normal places.
All the normal places you buy books. I don't want to give a shout out to just one. But if confirmed, excellent book. If you are planning to be confirmed, it's a must read. And the general public really needs to understand what goes on. It does an outstanding job of explaining. Arnold?
Well, thank you, and I'll say quickly, I'll be happy to sign a few books afterwards. And by the way, Jan and I donate any profits from our books to Marine Corps Scholarship Foundation, so we don't make any money off these books. They're really designed to basically help people and improve the process. And I would say, picking up on our colleagues, and thank you all for being here this morning. I think, as you mentioned, Jennifer, at the outset, the timing is right to make some changes. But it's going to take some hard work, because you're right, it's going to shift power around a little bit. But we have got to we are in, and people can argue about this, but we're in the most dangerous, most unpredictable, and most turbulent world that I've certainly seen in my lifetime. And we've all been through, a few conflicts. And we need the absolute very best people, particularly in the national security establishment, the Department of Energy, nuclear weapons, the intelligence apparatus. We need the very best people. And right now, when people call me and say, Arnold, they've asked me to be an assistant secretary, you think I ought to do it? And I kind of I say, well, yes, you're highly qualified, but let me make sure you understand, here's what the process is going to be. Well, I can't put my life on hold for a year and a half. I can't do that. So we have got to change it to get the very, very best people in. And hopefully this book will help. But all of you in the audience and all of you listening in, you can talk this up and talk to people, because I think, as we've said, I think they are starting to ask, what can we do to fix it? And how do we go about it? And we're going to have a change of administration. Either the president's going to be reelected, or we'll have a new president. And even in a reelected thing, you have what I call, and I shouldn't use this term, I'm going to violate my own thing, don't say something, I call it.
I didn't ask the question.
Yeah, I call it fruit basket turnover, because basically they're going to change out most all of the people that are there right now. Certainly if a new president's coming in, they're going to have all new people. So there's going to be an opportunity at the beginning of this administration to change the process and really get the very best people in and make it work. But it's going to take, as our colleagues have said, cooperation between the executive and legislative branch. We had the great benefit when Dick Cheney was Secretary of Defense. When you first took over as chairman, he collaborated with the chairman and with the ranking member, Senator Warner, and we knew in advance somebody that was going to be coming up and could give him a little advice. Well, Ms. Secretary, here's some things that probably are going to be of concern. Oh boy, that's a great person. Les Aspin did the same thing, but he didn't listen to the advice. He sent up a bunch of nominees that were never going to get through and didn't get through. So I think if we could get the new teams during the transition process to basically look at these reforms and also look at how do we get the very best people in and put together a working group, between the executive and legislative, we're going to get a much, much better outcome, and we're going to get the people we need to deal and lead, and particularly lead our troops in combat in this very dangerous world. So thanks to the panel members, and thank you so much.
Thank you to our panel. Thank you to our audience. Congratulations, Arnold.
Yeah, thank you.